twist, punch, double Arabian punch layout, and nails it.
Beginning in the 1930s, the 1936 Olympics for women was really just about art. It was about linear quality, lines, just showing off everything that was at that time considered feminine. According to sports journalist Bliss Lawrence, early balance beam was really just about dance. And strangely enough, just like all the apparatuses for women's artistic gymnastics, the equipment changes definitely did bring in necessarily what types of skills people were performing, because up until 1976 it was just a wood beam, and even in 1976 it was just a covered beam, where now it has springs in it, allowing people to do harder skills. According to Complete Gymnastics, a resource on understanding what materials are made of for the competition beams are generally a hollow aluminum body. And something that's interesting about the design of the beam is that there's foam to protect gymnasts from injury. In gym facilities specifically, and this is something I have seen because I have worked at a gymnastics center before, there are height adjusters, which you can basically make the beam a low beam so you can practice harder skills. The addition of having the low beam to practice on allows for much harder skills, which kind of pushes the envelope for the sport and really makes the sport, especially with balance beam, become more of an athletic event rather than an artistic or light and airy event like it was beginning in the 30s. Because the beam can now be lowered and is made of easier material, there's no need to be delicate and light and soft with your arms or your legs or your posture, and that is typically what was seen pretty much up until the 1970s, when the beam started to change its design. And then after that, it became more about doing harder skills and artistry. Moving on to the uneven bars, at the 1936 Olympic Games, the uneven bars were really just an offset version of the men's parallel bars, which really just shows that they were taking from a quote-unquote men's sport. This began to change over time and definitely progressed, distinguishing men's versus women's gymnastics. According to Gymnastics Zone, a resource on understanding the history of women's gymnastics, something that's interesting to know about the uneven bars is around the 50s, there were still very simple skills, but in the 60s and 70s, they began to change the equipment, which basically involved allowing or setting cables and keeping the bars further apart, which, bringing it up into the 80s when they moved them even more, allowed for giant swings, dismounts, more exciting moves. And with this, began to redefine femininity in this aspect that femininity was standing on the bar and just kind of doing these set things that were really basic and slow and dainty and artistic, and becoming more of combining that artistry with difficult skills and exciting things to watch. It was no longer just a sport that originated on the men's side, it was now a sport for women too. It's not to say that women had not been taking risks on the uneven bars before this release move was invented in 2010 by Tatiana Nabieva from Russia. It was definitely a men's gymnastics move, and a lot of people didn't really believe women would ever get to that level of being able to do a toe-on layout on the uneven bars. With that release and many other releases in the 2000s, there were so many that just kind of defied what people believed women could do on the uneven bars. And I really think that also is in essence part of, in a way, of how gymnastics has really been redefined and how femininity has been redefined within gymnastics, because it's no longer just about being perfect, especially in the cut of points nowadays, which I'll get on later, but it's also about showing that crisp execution, and there is this element of being careful and precise, but there's also this element of excitement and just ingenuity. And I think like looking at the sport even here versus the 1960s, it's completely different. Now, having seen vaults from 2016, I barely even recognize this as women's gymnastics at all. Not only has the vaulting table changed, springs have been added, a springboard has been in front of it. It's bigger, easier to hit with your hands. The vaults themselves are much more complex than jumping over the vault and barely making it over, or doing what was probably considered at that point in time the hardest vault in the Olympics, which is a front handspring vault, which nowadays would be given so many execution deductions for bent arms, lack of height. I could go on. This is footage from the 2016 vault final at the Rio Olympic Games, and as you can see, it is the same vault as before, but now with a front layout and 1.5 twists, much more height, thanks to that springboard and bigger table and training to do skills that are much more challenging. Another area of the sport where femininity expands is the fact that people can have eponymous skills like this. This was supposed to be a Yurchenko triple twist, and she would have had that named after her, Hong Eun-jung from Korea, but unfortunately she did fall, so she did not get the skill named after her. This skill, though, the Protonova, is a double front. It is the hardest vault as of 2016 in the women's competition, but it is extremely hard to nail. Founder of the Gymternet, Lauren is a huge resource for understanding when elite competitions occur, history of gymnastics, and things like that. And when asked a question about why men don't use music on floor and when floor became an event for women, it was actually around the 50s, in the 1956 Olympics exactly, is definitely where floor became more feminized. At this point, women began to experiment with choreography, adding music, and just kind of putting their own personality into events more. But still, there is this general focus on linear quality, and it didn't really become until later, like with Danielle Celavas and Kathy Rigby, where there was more of an emphasis on having younger athletes that could do more tricks and that could sustain more and do more flips and do more exciting things that people enjoyed. One of medalists, Kathy Rigby's biggest complaints about modern day gymnastics, which is definitely the opposite of what is shown here, is that because there's such an emphasis on bigger tricks, double tucks, full-ins, Celavas, like huge skills that people didn't even have anything close to. She's got one tuck here. People now do doubles in their last pass. It's extremely challenging nowadays, or in 2016 to be exact, to include the artistry with the hard tumbling to get the score you need. Floor is such an interesting event because it didn't always start out as a carpet. Later we added foam, and then eventually towards the end there were springs and other things added to basically make it safer, but also more exciting, because now at this point, when you have so much more spring in the floor, because it's not just a carpet, you can actually do more challenging tricks. And going back to Lauren's point from the Gymternet, basically having the springs within the floor allows for more challenging skills, and with those skills kind of is pushing away from femininity. It was no longer just about choreography and light movements. It became more of an athletic event. And in essence, for a lot of people, when you consider like a female gymnast, you think of the floor exercise because you're thinking of how much power they have in their tumbling. Nadia is a very interesting example because she is the first woman in a competition to receive a perfect 10 on an event, and I think she received multiple actually. She was a huge sensation, and she was the beginning of what people believed to say that perfection was attainable and she could do it, so then theoretically other people could get 10s. Unfortunately, in elite gymnastics, achieving a perfect 10 is impossible. Citing Betty Aquino, a judge for gymnastics in the US, what we expect that an athlete to do in their execution without any deductions is on the level of ridiculous. Still, there is a competitive spirit to do as well as you can, but instead of really working on your execution score, which would give people that perfect 10, it's more about the difficulty, how hard your events are, how hard your skills are, how high you can leap, how good your tumbling is. Unfortunately, like Ali Raisman's case, who got 4th and was tied with Alia Mustafana in the 2012 Olympics, difficulty will not always carry you so far because it was in the end execution that made Alia win that medal. So taking that drive for the next Olympics, Ali Raisman was able to secure an all-around medal next to Simone Biles. But it was really a combination of both difficulty and execution. It's fair to say, just looking at Ali's gymnastics, doing double Arabians off of beam and doing a really intense floor exercise, she definitely has that competitive spirit, and she also has that athletic ability. Coming full circle, artistry and execution are still important as it was in the 1930s, but there is still a huge emphasis on how difficult your skills are, or the D score. Together, these things bring together how Ali was able to win this medal in 2016, and that ultimately femininity is no longer just a simple skill or balletic dancing. It involves challenging skills and athleticism and building muscle and hard training, and this is what makes gymnastics so great, is that it combines this beautiful artistry and execution and attention to detail with insane athletic ability.